Welcome to Cool Talk, the story of President William McKinley. This story is essentially a love story. When a young lawyer named William McKinley met Ida Saxton, they hit it off almost immediately. Now, young William McKinley had had his ups and downs. He was not able to finish college mainly because of financial difficulties, exhaustion, depression. He participated in the Civil War where he was haunted the rest of his life for all the sights that he had seen of gore and atrocities and death. One story goes that he drove a wagon full of supplies to Union soldiers under the fire of the Confederates, a very brave man. In 1871, William married Ida, and soon they had two little girls. The older was Katie, and a couple of years later they had little Ida. But little Ida died as a newborn, and sadly, not too long afterwards, Katie, 3 years old, died as well. This was devastating for the couple, especially for the mother, Ida. For the rest of her life, she mourned. She got epilepsy and tremors in her hand, and William McKinley had to, you could say, smother his own grief in order to take care of his wife, both physically and emotionally. Sometimes these events tear couples apart, but in this instance, it brought them together. Ida's health was not good, and William would often bury his grief as he kept her afloat. People marveled at his devotion to her. His office was right across the street from the house, and every day when he crossed the street to go to work, he'd wave back at Ida, who stood at the window, and at work, he'd wave at her from his office window. He loved her. But even while spending all this time with his wife, William still found time to become governor of the state, and in 1896 he was elected President of the United States. McKinley embraced the gold standard, raised tariffs, and the country prospered. All was well. But unfortunately, William, who hated war, would become a wartime president. You see, Spain owned Cuba, but rebels in Cuba were struggling to liberate themselves. So, what did Spain do? It sent this man, Valeriano Wheeler, the butcher. He put over 100,000 Cubans in concentration camps. There were firing squads, starvation. By the time he was recalled, it was too late. The world wanted Spain out of Cuba. Now, you may wonder, why would the U.S. care about foreign affairs like these? Well, yes, the American people were appalled by the atrocities, but the U.S. government saw this as an opportunity to expand its influence. You see, you may not want to extend your grasp and take over other lands, but when everyone else is doing it, you better play the game, or they'll come after you in the end. At least that was the thinking. During all of this, William's devotion to his wife Ida did not stop. In government functions, it was not customary for leaders to sit next to their wives, but William did. He always worried about her and her illnesses, and when Ida's hands shook due to her tremors, he'd have her carry a bouquet of flowers so she could bow her head to greeters and not have to shake their hands. He shielded her from the bad press, and to its credit, the media never attacked her. It was a different era when reporters respected the personal lives of its leaders. They shielded Ida. Back to Cuba. The American people and Congress pushed McKinley towards war, but he refused. He said, "I would not get into a war unless I am sure that God and man approve. I have been through one war. I have seen the dead pile up, and I do not want to see another." So President McKinley sent a warship, the USS Maine, to go off the shores of Cuba and protect the lives of Americans on the island. Well, lo and behold, on February 15, 1898, the USS Maine blew up. And what caused the explosion? Everyone accused Spain of killing most of the 350 crew members and sinking our ship. The Americans screamed for war. McKinley hesitated and launched an investigation. He communicated with European leaders. He pushed for peace. He negotiated. He stalled. But when reports came in stating that Spain had blown up the USS Maine, he declared war. Today, with more modern technology, now we know that the explosion was probably caused by an engine malfunction, and Spain had nothing to do with it. but too late, we're going to war. Now, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt, resigned his post and joined in the fight against Spain. And he led a decisive charge up San Juan Hill and became a war hero. The United States also attacked the Spanish-controlled Philippines. McKinley used the telegram and the telephone, two new inventions to keep abreast of the situation and give orders as commander-in-chief. By July, Spain wanted to go to the table and talk peace. In the end, the U.S. gave Spain $20 million. Spain left Cuba. The U.S. gained possession of territories in Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam. McKinley and European leaders helped stop a rebellion in China. Then they opened an open door policy. After all of this, McKinley, well, he expanded territories in the U.S. The economy thrived. His first term was over and it's time for a re-election. Now, while McKinley was preparing for re-election, for the campaign, I should say, well, the vice president died, and he chose the war hero Theodore Roosevelt to be his vice presidential candidate, even though Roosevelt already had a reputation for being a loose cannon. Ida and McKinley celebrated the beginning of a new century. Spirits were high, and their love was stronger than ever. On September 6, 1901, McKinley was at an expo in Buffalo, New York. He was shaking hands with the crowd when an anarchist named Leon Solgosk reached out with a pistol and shot McKinley twice. McKinley was rushed to a hospital, and he begged them not to tell Ida bad news, to kind of hint good news and give her some hope. But get this, the only doctor who was there who could perform surgery was a gynecologist. They didn't have an x-ray machine. But believe it or not, there was an x-ray machine at the expo. They probed and poked. McKinley probably would have survived, but they gave him infections. On September 14, William McKinley died, and Ida, heartbroken, would keep a portrait of him next to her. It was the first image she saw in the morning and the last image she saw at night. 7 years later, she passed away and was buried next to her husband. What a story. Well, in our next video, we have to review the most controversial and one of the most dynamic figures in American history, Theodore Roosevelt. But in the meantime, comment below, or better yet, subscribe. This is Cool Talk.